Hello and welcome back to HEMAFightBreakdowns. Today we're going to be doing another CombatCon non-longsword gold medal match. So if you're a fan of non-longsword content, well, CombatCon was absolutely the tournament for you, because in my mind the non-longsword matches were really the thing that shone best in the CombatCon finals live stream, and longsword was, maybe a little bit mired by the height division. So we're going to have sword and buckler here between Sam Ryals and Justin Reimer, and it's going to be a pretty one-sided fight, but still a very interesting one, especially if you're the kind of person who wants to get sword and buckler onto the main stage and into the level of competitiveness that longsword usually reserves by itself. So we're here on our first exchange, and right off we get an awful camera angle where you just flat out can't see what happens. So instead of really going over this exchange, I'm just going to freeze frame it here and talk about this crooked cut, because one of the cool things about sword and buckler is that you get to do these krumpau, these crooked cut attacks to the arms and to the person rather than to the blade. In things like longsword, maybe even saber, when you're cutting at somebody's blade, you're doing so because of course you want to take their offense away from them, but in sword and buckler, offense and defense are disconnected. So the ability for you to hit somebody's reverse arm, their non-lead arm, really comes from your ability to move around a buckler. And these crooked strikes are an absolutely perfect way to do that. Now in this particular exchange, you can see here Justin is using that crooked strike to extend his hand forward, but then dip the blade down and get it past the buckler so that it can hit the arm that normally people assume is perfectly safe because it's sitting behind a literal shield. So if you can pull these off in sword and buckler, you can often get a lot of really cheeky points. The only problem being that you have to get pretty close to do so, and you need to make sure that your opponent isn't, hitting you with something at the exact same time. Now we're here in the second exchange, and the first one was ruled double, so basically this is the first exchange, and we have another classic sword and buckler scenario, one in which both people go for the leg shot. And if you don't already know, one of the things about sword and buckler is that you can keep your head defended while going for a low priority target, even a low priority target like the leg. And the issue with this is that oftentimes you'll see in sword and buckler tournaments where people aren't really used to doing sword and buckler, they just kind of signed up for the other weapon because they felt like they needed to round out their day, is you're going to see a lot of this because the instinct is always there to just go for something that you can hit and then hold your buckler up in front of your head and hope that it can keep you safe. And as you can see from this exchange, once you get to a certain level of sword and buckler, it becomes a lot easier to get around your opponent's instinctual put the buckler in front of my face and pray to God style attack and, try to get something at least in an afterblow or a double situation. So what happens in this exchange, Justin goes for that leg shot after Sam goes for that leg shot, and they both basically just hit each other, and as they attempt to retreat out, they both realize, well, if I had maybe gone for something other than the leg, I probably would have gotten the better of this exchange, because getting around that just instinctual parry is pretty easy with something like a thrust, or as we saw in the previous exchange, a crooked cut. Okay, so we got our two doubly exchanges out of the way, and now it's time for the good stuff. Justin launches a full attack with a little bit of a low thrust towards Sam's belly, while Sam, who has been very defensive this entire time, has managed to back up fast enough in order to defend himself from that thrust and then throw a nice counter shot over the top. However, once he lands that counter shot, Justin comes back in again with a little bit of offline footwork and throws a nice remise that manages to land on the head. So how does this whole sequence come together? Justin comes in with the very explosive, far-reaching thrusting attack. And this is very common in sword and buckler because thrusts tend to do a little bit better than cuts, just because it's a lot harder to defend a thrust than it is a cut with a just solid piece of plastic or steel. So after he fails to land that thrust, Sam, of course, goes for a highline attack, but on the buckler side. And this is a very intelligent choice, because one of the difficulties of landing certain shots in sword and buckler is how to get around the zone of control that the buckler always exerts. Normally, you don't want to throw cuts on the buckler side because, of course, the buckler can just move to intercept. But if you're already in a situation where your opponent has perhaps overextended themselves a little bit, and you can get your wrist past the level of the buckler, you can actually throw those cuts with impunity because now the buckler has to pull itself back in order to get into the zone where it can then reassert its defensive capabilities. So just like you would if you were doing a kind of classic Lichtenauer Duplieren in longsword, once you are past the blade, aka the defensive implement of the opponent, you can basically throw any cuts on that same side, and you are basically obligated to do so because you can guarantee that in their attempt to try to pull their defense back to get in front of your attack, they're not going to be able to make it in time, and you can hit for free. Now, the next exchange is a really fast one, but there's still a lot of details to break down here. Justin comes in once again with a highly explosive forward momentum attack, but this time he throws a very basic cut from his right side straight into the buckler of Sam. However, after it makes contact with the buckler on that long edge, Justin kind of flips it upside down and turns it into a bit of a wrapping shot. If you're not familiar with the term wrapping shot, it usually comes from SEA, and basically in the world of HEMA, it's just a crump out. And normally, there is nothing wrong with doing this particular kind of attack, but the caveat is that you have to make sure to be transitioning from your long edge cut to your short edge crump cut before you make contact with your opponent's sword and or their buckler. And the reason for that is that once you make contact with that implement, you've completely lost all of your forward momentum, and your ability to go from a sitting position here, flip your short edge, and then cut meaningfully is basically reduced to zero. I would completely understand if under certain contexts this could be considered a valid cut, but considering the forward momentum and the amount of stoppage that Sam's buckler had on Justin's forward reaching arm, I agree with the judges here in saying that that was not quite quality enough. At the exact same time, of course, as they came together in their clash, Sam threw a completely normal long edge strike, which managed to hit along the brow line of Justin and above his own buckler, which means it was completely unimpeded when it landed, and Sam came away with some critical high value points. So, unfortunately for us, this is the final exchange, and Sam, who has gotten a pretty commanding lead so far in this fight with his counterattacks to the head, is only going to maintain that lead as Justin once again full sends for a low thrust on the line and just gets hit on the top of the head. But there's still a little bit of interesting information to glean here, even though it is basically the same exchange as the third. The deal here is that one of the things that Justin does perhaps wrong as a bit of a mistake here is that when he comes forward with his full send thrust on the right side, he does so with kind of like a leaping Olympic fencing lunge. Now, one of the deals with, of course, sword and buckler and many other weapons is that when you are trying to reach somebody, you want to make sure that your body is in alignment. You want to have your dominant hand with the weapon in it and your dominant leg moving forward at the same time. That's going to give you the most reach. The problem is, in order to align the right side of your body forward, you have to pull the left side of your body back. And in sword and buckler, when your defense comes from that left side being just as much in measure as the right side, you can have this problem occur, where as you watch the slow-mo here, you can see that as Justin is throwing his thrust with the right side, his left arm gets pulled back so far that his buckler is no longer in any position to defend him. As a result, he gets hit on the head, and that buckler didn't do anything to save him. So even in the situation where Justin had maybe reached him with his thrust, he wouldn't have had the ability to defend himself, and he couldn't have gotten away with the clean 3 points that he so desperately needed to come back into this fight. So what can you do different? Well, for one, you can try switching your feet, but this is a pretty tall order for a lot of people. One, they're very used to fighting with their right leg forward, but two, even if you fight with your left leg forward, you're probably just going to take a big passing step with that thrust and end up with your right leg forward again. And this is where I'm going to compliment Sam a little bit on his form, because one of the things that he's very good at, and one of the reasons that he did so well against Justin's committed attacks, is that he kept both of his arms as far forward as he could extend them the entire time. Very rarely, if ever, pulling either of his hands back to his chest in order to feel more comfortable or more defensive, because in reality, the further you can keep that buckler forward and the further you can keep that sword forward, the better work you're going to be able to do. And you end up in these positions not so unlike you'll see in the pictures on like I-33 or Balinese side sword manuals, where people are basically leaning over their own lead leg and scooching their gut back and basically standing in a position where they're trying to deprioritize minimize all of their lower targets and focus on presenting all of their upper targets into measure, because that's the one where that buckler is just going to be an invincible wall standing in the way. If you don't have to worry about someone being able to reach your gut or reach your leg without exposing everything on their own body, well then, if they're going to commit far enough to hit you, that's probably going to happen anyway, but now you're going to have your complete pick of these high priority targets while they do so. So a really nice execution of some good stance and distance work that led to Sam being able to successfully defend every single one of Justin's explosive attacks, which of course were working for him well right up till now, because he of course got to the first place match. So if you're looking to get into sword and buckler yourself, and hopefully we're all going to start seeing more highly competitive sword and buckler matches in the future as people tend to take it more seriously, we're going to end up getting more great things to break down, and I'm eventually going to have to learn to talk about sword and buckler, because right now I don't really know what I'm talking about. But we're going to have that emphasis, we're going to have more videos, and of course they're all going to be on CombatCon's non-longsword weapons, so I will see you on Thursday.